Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is generally considered to be Miyazaki's first major work. What some people may be surprised to hear is that Miyazaki was very much an active creator before he made Nausicaa. I would be remiss if I left out these first works of Miyazaki because I don't think one can fully understand him as a filmmaker and artist without looking into where he started, and taking in his earlier works, it's hard to recognize both the development and consistency of his themes and views throughout the years. It may be surprising for some to discover that Nausicaa was not Miyazaki's debut, but a little animated television series called Future Boy Conan. Though this show may seem like more of a footnote in Miyazaki's career, when examined closely, the seeds for what would become distinctly Miyazaki were being planted. But before getting directly to Conan, there is a much larger context for both how Miyazaki became the director and how the series turned out from his direction. Prior to Conan, Hayao Miyazaki had risen through the ranks of the animation industry, getting his start at Toei Animation in 1963. Now, it's important to note that Miyazaki did not initially want to be an animator, but a manga artist. He claimed to have joined Toei Animation because, quote, "that was when I decided to abandon manga." He started out as an in-between animator on different shows before rising to become a key animator in the company. It was around that time that Miyazaki met Isao Takahata, whom he would later partner with to form Studio Ghibli. They both worked on the film Little Norse Prince Valiant, which Takahata directed and released it in 1968. A few years later, both Miyazaki and Takahata left Toei, but the two continued to work on projects together. These projects included Hiedi, Girl of the Alps, and Panda Go Panda. Miyazaki served as the primary animator of the projects he worked on with Takahata, never taking the helm of directing the project himself. But that eventually changed when he was made director for the television series based on the book The Incredible Tide by Alexander Key and animated by Nippon Animation. After a year or so working through production issues, story changes, and minor delays, the show Future Boy Conan was completed and broadcasted by NHK from April to October of 1978. In the year 2008, a devastating war is fought with ultramagnetic weapons that bring about a post-apocalyptic world, causing many earthquakes and tsunamis, and other natural disasters. This leads to an attempt by a small group of people to flee the havoc by traveling into outer space. However, the plan fails and their spaceship is forced back to Earth, crashing on a small deserted island. In the aftermath, this group discovers that their ship crash became a well filled with fresh water, allowing them to survive on the island and begin anew. This island, which comes to be called Remnant Island, became the new home for these survivors. After some time, Conan is born on this island and lives with the people. Over time, the survivors begin to die off, and eventually only Conan and his grandfather remain. The story begins with Conan fishing in the sea for a shark, and he is able to catch it with little to no effort, given his extraordinary abilities in swimming fast underwater. When he comes ashore, he finds a girl lying unconscious on the beach. Having never met someone his age before this moment, it is understandably a shocking moment for Conan. After freaking this girl out, Conan goes and retrieves his grandpa, and together they nurse her back to health. The girl reveals to Conan and his grandfather that there are other humans that have survived, which brings comfort to Conan's grandfather. The next morning, Conan talks to the girl, who is able to communicate with birds. She tells him that her name is Lana and that she came from the island High Harbor. This surprises Conan because he has never left Remnant Island. The two begin to quickly bond before an unannounced plane arrives above Remnant Island. Lana claims that the plane has come to bring her back to Industria, which she says is a bad place. The plane lands near Conan's home, and two soldiers come out to investigate the island. When Conan's grandfather questions their intentions, the head soldier, Monsley, berates him for forcing her and others around her age to be subjected to the horrors of war. Conan's grandfather eventually forces them out by threatening them with an old missile, causing Monsley to leave. As she does, one of her henchmen attempts to kill Conan's grandfather, but Conan stops him. Unfortunately, this causes the missile to explode, mortally wounding Conan's grandfather. Lana is subsequently kidnapped by Monsley, but Conan tries and fails to rescue her. Returning to his home, Conan stays with his grandfather as he dies. Before his death, Conan's grandfather instructs him to explore the world and find friends. Conan grieves for some time before he decides to set out and find Lana. Many days pass until Conan arrives to another island. When he does, he encounters another youth like him, Jimsy. Although Jimsy is initially hostile to Conan, he eventually warms up to him and the two quickly befriend one another. Soon after, a ship called the Barracuda arrives on the island, and Jimsy quickly prepares his goods to trade with the crew. The captain of the Barracuda, Captain Dice, has landed to mine the island for plastic, which has become a highly coveted item in the world. Jimsy and Conan meet up again, and Jimsy reveals that the Barracuda has come from Industria. Conan decides that they should stow away on the ship and head for Industria. Midway through the voyage, Jimsy reveals that he and Conan have stowed away by getting caught by the Barracuda's crew. Captain Dice allows them to remain on the ship if they both receive spankings. Because Jimsy was drunk, which led to their capture, Conan takes all of the spankings. After this, Conan and Jimsy work on the ship by breaking down the plastics collected. Eventually, the Barracuda arrives at Industria. Upon arrival, Captain Dice is confronted by Maudsley about bringing Lana to Industria instead of Dr. Lau, at which point Conan attacks her. This results in Conan being put in a cell awaiting his punishment. Meanwhile, the chief administrator of Industria, Lepka, and the higher committee decide whether to keep Lana or not. Captain Dice claims that they should because she could have information on Dr. Lau's whereabouts, since Dr. Lau is Lana's grandfather. The committee goes on with Dice's decision, though Dice becomes embittered because he is not rewarded for his efforts. Lepka then forcefully interrogates Lana into revealing the location of Dr. Lau. The reason that Lepka needs Dr. Lau is that Industria's nuclear reactor is running out of power, and Dr. Lau's knowledge is crucial to the survival of Industria. Lepka further threatens Lana by claiming that he will mark her as useless if she won't comply. After Lepka leaves Lana to think things over, Maudsley visits her to tell her that Conan has been captured and tried to rescue her, but will now be re-educated and used by Industria. However, Jimsy is able to rescue Conan, and they escape into the bowels of Industria, where they are able to find Lana. Conan successfully rescues Lana, and during their escape, they come across a giant aircraft that looks like a moth. Lana explains that during the war, these planes were used to cause mass destruction across the world. She infers that Lepka's true intentions are to use the knowledge of Dr. Lau to power this plane and conquer the world. Conan and Lana are then caught in the hangar by Lepka, who then threatens to hurt Conan if Lana doesn't tell him where her grandfather is. The viciousness of Lepka convinces Dice to rebel against him and help Lana. Dice and his crew are successful in kidnapping Lana and escaping from Industria on the Barracuda. Lepka attempts to chase after Dice, but loses him fairly quickly. After this, Maudsley leads a group of soldiers in the plane called Falco to look for the Barracuda. As they prepare, Conan escapes from his cell and sneaks into the Falco in time before it takes off. While the Falco looks for the Barracuda, Jimsy meets up with Lana, telling her that he helped Conan in getting to Industria to save her and that he is willing to look out for her. This comforts Lana, who is still upset that Conan was left behind. That night, Dice prepares some food for Lana, who then argues with him about leaving Conan in Industria. Dice then threatens to throw her out of the ship, opening one of the windows. This leads to the Falcon picking up on the light coming from the Barracuda. As the Falcon begins to pursue the Barracuda, Conan tampers with the plane, allowing himself to escape. He eventually tries to swim to the Barracuda, but is pushed back by the propellers. Lana then escapes on a lifeboat to save Conan, but the Barracuda is captured by Lepka. Lepka sees the lifeboat and uses his gunboat to blow it up. Fortunately, Conan and Lana survive and wash up on another island. It is here that Lana is able to hear her grandfather, Dr. Lau, telepathically. The two decide to search for him on the island, but after some time they are captured by a man named Patch. He brings them to an Industrian salvage platform where he and his crew plan to uplift a passenger ship from underwater. Patch decides to put the kids to work, much to the dismay of Tarrant, a worker for Patch. Conan says that he is willing to help Patch with diving, and Patch makes him prove his skills. After proving to Patch his diving abilities, Conan is set to work. Tarrant becomes suspicious of Patch's intentions with the kids and tries to get Conan and Lana to reveal who they are. As soon as Patch discovers that Tarrant was threatening the kids, Maudsley arrives in the Falco looking for Conan and Lana. Tarrant takes this opportunity to let Maudsley know the kids are with Patch. Tarrant returns to Industria with Maudsley, who both go to Lepka and plan to capture Lana. They decide to send Tarrant back with a radio so he can inform them when Lana meets up with Dr. Lau. However, when Tarrant returns, Patch claims that an earthquake has begun and secures the area. He goes underwater to make preparations, but gets trapped underneath the ship. Conan comes to his rescue. Afterwards, Patch reveals himself to be Dr. Lau, at which point Tarrant informs Lepka. Just then, another tremor causes the beach near the salvaging platform to sink. Lau takes the opportunity to escape with Lana and Conan on a lifeboat. Later, the three return to the island so Lau can recover a flying machine that he used to escape Industria. They return to the city in order to fully repair the machine, while also rescuing Dice, who was left for dead in the desert. The Falco spots the flying machine, but Conan is able to trick Maudsley and her crew into shooting their own plane. As Maudsley is captured, another earthquake occurs. This leads Lau to suspect that the Earth's crust is breaking up. The crew sets out for Industria, leaving Maudsley behind, who breaks free of her restraints and tries to contact Lepka. Following their arrival, Conan and Dice go to rescue the crew and retake the Barracuda, while Lau and Lana infiltrate the Triangle Tower to receive an IC chip to repair the flying machine. As they go along, Lau and Lana come across a large graveyard where people from Industria tried to survive the war. Dice rescues his crew, but Conan stays behind to free prisoners who rebelled against Lepka. Jimsy leaves Dice and goes to help Conan, and together they go to search for Lau and Lana. One of the prisoners, Luke, leads Conan and Jimsy to the core block, but Lepka and his soldiers arrive there as well. Lau decides to distract Lepka's troops so Lana can escape. Conan and Jimsy find Lana, and the three rescue Lau and escape from Industria, reuniting with Dice and the Barracuda. The reunion is cut short when Lau decides to return to Industria, much to the dismay of Lana. He plans to help aid the citizens and prisoners held captive by Lepka. The Barracuda sets sail and arrives at High Harbor, but it's met with hostility from Mr. Gull on a fishing ship, which bombs the hull. Lana is able to explain to him that the Barracuda isn't working for Industria, and the damaged Barracuda lands on the island safely. On High Harbor, Lana, Conan, and Jimsy tour around, meeting Orlo, who lives on the other side of the island that isn't friendly to Lana's people. The three then meet Lana's aunt and uncle, with whom they stay with on the island. After a few days or so, Lana takes the boys to the textile mill, where she works. They also visit the industrial district, where Dice and his crew have taken up tools to work. Conan and Jimsy decide to work by fishing and hunting respectively. While fishing, Conan properly meets Mr. Gull, who takes care of the village fish preserve, and he begins working for him. Meanwhile, Jimsy gets chased by and eventually kills a wild boar when they both fall over the edge of a cliff. He cooks the boar and brings it back to the village for the people to eat. However, the boar Jimsy killed actually belonged to Orlo, who promptly confronts the village. The mayor pledges to give him 60 bags of flour if he can find the thief. One of the villagers recognizes the bow and arrow Orlo brought as Jimsy's, which leads Lana's uncle to attempt an apology to Orlo. But during the night, Conan and Jimsy sneak out of the village to take responsibility. As they reach the mountain, they are captured by Orlo's gang. They make a deal that Orlo will forget about his lost pig, if they can prove that they really brought it down by defeating another one of his boars. Orlo agrees to the bet, and with cleverness and teamwork, Jimsy and Conan succeed in capturing a boar. Jimsy decides to work for Orlo, but when his sister Tara tries to steal a goat from the herder Taito, he quits. Around this time, Lana arrives and gives an heirloom from her mother, a valuable necklace, to Orlo to compensate for the lost pig. Conan tries to stop her, but she slaps him. After they and Jimsy leave, Lana breaks down, explaining to Conan that she didn't want him getting hurt over small matters. After he and Lana make amends, Conan, along with Jimsy, decide to build a house to live with the people of High Harbor. In a dream, Lana has a premonition about an attack on High Harbor from Industria. When she awakes, she tries to communicate with her grandfather, whom she believes sent her the dream telepathically. Conan takes her to Taito's village to ease her mind, and they visit Jimsy, who works as a pig herder. He shows her the treehouse he and Conan built to live in. Meanwhile, Dice visits Orlo in order to find a way to get on the sea again. Dice convinces Orlo to help him fix the Barracuda, but in return, Dice is forced to help Orlo kill Conan and Jimsy for not trading with him. As the two repair the ship, Industrian troops under Maudsley launch an attack against High Harbor. Conan decides to investigate the attack on the island with Jimsy, leaving Lana to warn the village about the Industrian ship. Orlo and his men try to fight Maudsley and her soldiers, but they are decisively defeated. After rescuing Tara from the carnage, Conan and Jimsy hitch a ride with Dice to help the villagers organize a proper defense. The mayor of the village decides to mobilize the village to fight against Maudsley. Meanwhile, Maudsley captures Orlo, who decides to help her with navigating the island and capturing High Harbor. He and his men stage an act in order to get into High Harbor's defenses and overtake them from within. As Maudsley's gunboat closes in on the villagers, Lana is knocked out by a cannon blast. Conan sees Jimsy's pet piglet, Umasu, which was entrusted to Lana, arrive on its own, which immediately alerts him that she's in danger. Conan saves Lana from Industria's soldiers but gets knocked out while trying to escape. Lana manages to hide him before she herself gets captured and taken aboard the gunboat. Mr. Gull finds Conan later at night, who informs him that the village has been taken over by Maudsley, who sets up Orlo as a puppet leader to force the people to do Industria's bidding. They decide to make preparations to sink the gunboat with explosives. While planting the makeshift bombs, Conan is caught trying to rescue Lana. He is able to convince the crew of the gunboat to take him out of his cell just as the charges detonate and the gunboat is sunk. As the ship sinks, Conan rescues Lana and they return to High Harbor. Following the gunboat's explosion, Maudsley decides to repair the Barracuda and use it instead, while Orlo's gang is sent out to find Conan, who is planning to blow up the Barracuda with Mr. Gull. Dice stumbles upon Lana in the fish preserve, and when she notices the island's animals beginning to act strangely, she goes to warn the village about a coming disaster. Orlo stops her, but she telepathically informs Conan about a coming tidal wave. Conan warns everybody, and they all run to safety. Following the massive tide, the Industrian soldiers surrender. Conan then decides to return to Industria using an old seaplane left by Dr. Lau in the fish preserve cave. Together with Jimsy, Maudsley, Lana, and Dice as a stowaway, Conan departs High Harbor. Upon reaching Industria, the group encounters a restored Falcon. Conan and Maudsley distracted and are captured as Lana, Dice, and Jimsy disembark. Under pursuit, Lana, Dice, and Jimsy find a way into the underground barracks of the lower-class citizenry. They come across Luke and his friends, who inform them that Dr. Lau has made a deal with the High Council to evacuate Industria, but they were all detained by Lepka, who has appointed himself dictator. Maudsley witnesses Lepka viciously torture Lau and ruthlessly planning to flood Lana out of the residential area. She tries to persuade him to follow Dr. Lau's advice, but Lepka refuses to do so. Maudsley then openly turns against Lepka and helps Conan escape, but she gets shot, forcing Conan to leave her behind. Conan then descends to the residential area to rescue Lana. He attempts to defuse the bombs that are being used to flood the caverns, but he fails. Lana gives herself up to Lepka to save the residents, but Lepka seals the exit anyway, leaving the people to drown. When he takes Lana to her grandfather, they both learn that Dr. Lau has become numb and blind from his tortures. In response, Lepka tries to force Lana to contact him by threatening to plunge her off the Triangle Tower. In the meantime, Conan rejoins Dice and Jimsy as they exit the caverns through a flooded earthquake fissure, where they rescue Maudsley. They manage to open the main shutter to the caverns, allowing residents to storm Triangle Tower. Conan pursues Lepka up the tower as he, with Lana, attempts to flee via a flying machine. Conan is able to damage the vessel and save Lana, while Lepka is supposedly killed aboard the crashing flyer. Lana wakes Dr. Lau, and together they and the High Council scientists work to complete the solar tower and activate the satellite. Their efforts are successful, and Industria gains enough power to initiate an evacuation. After the initiation, Lau uses the Triangle Tower's holographic park to explain to Conan, Lana, and Jimsy that the old world's dream of unlimited power was responsible for the great catastrophe that devastated the Earth, and that humanity shall henceforth learn to live in harmony with nature again. As more earthquakes begin to herald Industria's incoming destruction, Lepka, who survived the crash of his flyer, and a troop of loyalists secretly channel some solar power underground to charge up the Giganto, a giant warplane from the last war. When a power leak is discovered and cut, Lepka's forces covertly seize the control room and continue to divert power to the plane. Noticing the takeover, Lana and Maudsley escape aboard the Falco to inform the others, and in response, Conan and the others return to Industria. Having completed recharging, the Giganto takes off. Conan's group tries to stop it, but it ends up crashing through the plane's surface. After pushing the Falco back out to enable Maudsley and Lana to return to Industria, Conan, Jimsy, and Dice infiltrate the Giganto. They evade Lepka's attempts to kill them, inflicting critical damage to the Giganto. While Dice and Jimsy end up getting thrown inside the tail rudder, Conan confronts Lepka as he tries to get away in an escape pod. Despite Conan's attempt to save them, Lepka and the rest of his men are left to perish aboard the doomed Giganto. A week later, as the final stage of the cataclysm arrives, all the Industrians except the High Council mount the restored passenger ship and watch Industria sink into the sea. Conan, Dice, and Jimsy are rescued by the Industrians from the sea, and after asking Conan to look after Lana, Dr. Lau dies contently. Sometime later, the old and new inhabitants of High Harbor conduct a celebration for the marriage of Dice and Maudsley, as well as a dedication for the relaunch of the Barracuda. Many of the new settlers, including Conan, Lana, Jimsy, Tara, Luke, Maudsley, and the Barracuda's crew, leave to establish a new colony on Remnant Island, furthering the survival of humanity. As stated earlier, Conan was adapted from The Incredible Tide, written by Alexander Key and published in 1970. The original story was a very bleak tale and much darker compared to the television series, which was part of the reason why Miyazaki was initially hesitant to take on the project. He eventually conceded to directing the series, on the condition that he was allowed to make changes to the story. The biggest concern he had with the story is the symbolic roles of High Harbor and Industria. In the original book, High Harbor and Industria appeared as obvious stand-ins for the United States and the Soviet Union respectively, meaning that the work was more of a commentary on tensions between the two opposing sides of the Cold War. Miyazaki wanted to drop this subtext entirely, stating, quote, "In the original story, the whole focus of the Soviet Union in America represents a type of arrogance, and I really hate it. And therefore it really bugs me that despite all my efforts to eliminate this perspective from the story, some people still say that High Harbor represents America and Industria represents the Soviet Union. Thinking of the Soviet Union or of the United States in those terms is in itself a problem. From these statements, it seems that Miyazaki wanted to move away from confronting real-world scenarios and provide a more escapist narrative, while at the same time engaging in discussion about disaster and survival in difficult situations. Moving away from a Cold War mindset also allows for more complex characters, rather than having a clear-cut good side and bad side. This is seen most obviously in the characters of Captain Dice and Maudsley, who grow and develop over the course of the story. Dice is mainly a joke character throughout the narrative, but his comic relief is needed at times and works really well. His introduction marks the point in the story where the viewers can begin to see the complexities of those who ally themselves with Industria. Dice never really comes off as a bad guy, and therefore he doesn't have a hard time switching sides. Miyazaki asserts, quote, "We had to gradually reveal his good qualities, and in the end this worked quite well." When it comes to Maudsley, she is perhaps the most complex character in the series. At the beginning, the audience is supposed to have a great deal of disdain for her, seeing as she is fully willing to go along with Industria's will. She feels this way because she believes Industria is the only solution to restoring the world to how it was before the great disasters and wars. It isn't until much later in the series that we see the trauma and pain that Maudsley has dealt with growing into adulthood during the war. Miyazaki himself felt changed and hurt by the character of Monsley. Quote, Monsley's such a sad case that she nearly brought tears to my eyes. So then I started feeling that I ought to do something to help her out. I like women like Monsley. They look tough and defiant, but say they're waiting for someone to make them change. The change mainly comes in her continual interactions with Conan, who represents a gleeful optimism about the potential for the future, despite all the difficulties that have come before. Conan is the driving force of the story, mainly in his relationships with others. There are very few times where he lets his emotions get the better of him, showing his maturity given the circumstances. The main exception to this is when his grandfather dies, a moment which defines him because it's the only time where he is given a choice, either to remain on his island or to explore the world. In exploring the world, he unintentionally changes it by being a force of good for it. His kindness and compassion for his friends and allies makes them continually confident. Even when he engages with his enemies, he has an aura about him that cannot be ignored. Conan essentially represents the potential that the world has, despite the disasters from the past. Lana, on the other hand, has what Miyazaki calls a, quote, darker aspect to her character. She usually has to decide between Conan and her grandfather, Dr. Lau, which produces an interesting duality in her. Though she wants to be as happy and carefree as Conan, her concern for her grandfather and for High Harbor forces her to make difficult decisions when it comes to saving those whom she loves. As Conan continues to interact with her, Lana becomes less attached to Dr. Lau, which is why Miyazaki had him die at the end, in order to free her. Though not seen much throughout the series, Dr. Lau is an important character in terms of informing the viewer about the meaning behind the story. Miyazaki portrays him as a caring man for Lana and for those of High Harbor, but at the same time, he does not hide his bad intentions, even going so far as to call him, quote, essentially an evil character. Unlike Lepka, however, Dr. Lau does feel a great pressure and remorse for his actions, never trying to excuse or forgive them. This attitude is also likely why he is willing to endure the pain brought about by Lepka on him, and why he willingly loses his will to live, knowing though that Lana is safe. The only character that is clearly depicted as evil is Lepka. Lepka essentially represents the excessive corruption of power and desire to perfect the world. His perfection, however, involves depriving the earth of its natural resources, rather than trying to benefit both nature and humanity. However, the addictive corruption that Lepka attains is what keeps him from having any kind of sympathy, either from his enemies or allies. In a sense, it is his obsession with power and control that leads to his downfall, which consequently leads humanity to prosper. The series is very much driven by its characters, which help to lead the story in a much more optimistic direction. In doing this, Miyazaki presents a potential world for the viewers to live in, one where we are able to think less about ourselves and more about who we live with and around, and what are the best interests for the people in general, rather than living in isolation and thinking only about oneself and one's goals. When asked about his feelings on directing the show, Miyazaki asserted, quote, I thought that directing really wasn't for me, because a director has to assume such a heavy individual responsibility. Seeing what directing involved made me not try it up until then. Prior to directing, Miyazaki had primarily served as lead storyboarder for many of Takahata's works, and for the film Little Samurai in 1972. He claimed that storyboarding was a much easier task to do than directing, which came with much more responsibility and challenge. The main challenges for Miyazaki in directing Conan came from the subject matter. He found it difficult to work on Conan because the story had a much darker tone initially than the other projects he had worked on. Furthermore, conditions were not the best. He stated, quote, when we started, we didn't have the right conditions to work on the project. We had no animation staff and we had no art director. Though these and many other positions would be solidified, the series was constantly plagued by delays and rewrites with the script, along with each episode consisting on average of roughly 6,500 drawings, which was difficult to produce given the lack of people working on the project. What helped to relieve the stresses of the conditions of the project was the product itself. Miyazaki recalled that drawing Conan helped because the story was more optimistic, which raised the staff's morale. The production was very difficult compared to most of the other projects that Miyazaki had worked on, but his determination allowed him and his staff to persevere and finish the series. Future Boy Conan is Miyazaki's first attempt at telling a story as a director, and for a debut work, I would say that it does a good job at what it's trying to achieve. Though the show is made for young kids, Miyazaki deals with complex themes of nature, technology, morality, and survival in a way that is digestible and thought-provoking. Though the animation by today's standards is dated, for television in 1978, I'd say it was very well done. Unfortunately, the series did not do very well, which Miyazaki chalked up to the lack of more action with the aircraft. Over time, however, many creators would come to review the series, taking elements of it and placing them in their own works, most famously seen in Hideki Anno's Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. The series set the groundwork for many of the themes and images that Miyazaki would delve into in his later works. With the experience of Conan behind him, Miyazaki became sought after for the role of director of a feature-length film involving a popular thief and hero, Lupin III.